on Ben Chilwell, because it was something that came out last week, that rumours about how somehow Chelsea had made a breakthrough. It's sort of gone quiet
Mm,
since then. None of sort of the big Chelsea reporters have sort of talked about Chilwell. But the thing I wanted
yeah.
to ask you about it, because the negativity around it was something that really surprised me. I know it's been building over recent months, and I've talked about every single left back you can think of linked to Chelsea, as I'm sure you
Sure,
have as
absolutely.
well,
Same,
from
mate. Yeah,
Telles
yeah.
to Tagliafico to
Mm,
Gozans to everyone you can think of. And
yeah,
Chilwell's been that constant name. Why do
yeah.
you think there is a section, and it's mostly online, of course? Why do you think there is a section of people who are doubtful about Ben Chilwell and think he'd be a poor transfer for Chelsea?
Well, okay, so it's a really broad. Firstly, Ben Chilwell has been in disappointing form for a long time. That's like the inescapable, and probably at the front of everyone's head mind. If he was tearing it up, then people won't be saying anything. Do you know what I mean? It's because he's been in poor form. People are bringing out the fact how perhaps he's been in poor form, but then they're also trying to highlight perhaps negative attributes that aren't there. Like you say, because if it's on Twitter, that platform is incredibly toxic. So, the whole like Brexit FC thing, Lampard's favour, bias towards English players and all this kind of nonsense stuff. He's worth a lot of money. So that's putting people off. If he was like 20 million again, that would be another main reason. But yeah, poor form and a lot of money. But the fact, if you don't mind me expanding on the transfer generally, the fact is that he's a player that the coaching staff at Chelsea want for a reason. Someone tweeted out, and they must excuse me for not crediting them because I can't remember who tweeted out. I responded to it, but it was a big statistical comparison between Ben Chilwell and Sergio Reguilon of Real Madrid and Sevilla, because obviously he's like the hot topic on Twitter that the Twitter Chelsea fans would like because he'd be affordable and it's kind of more of a sexy signing from Europe. And he's a very, very good player. So that's important to know. And I think this statistical comparison that was relatively comprehensive came up with Reguilon's the better offensive fullback. Chilwell's the better defensive fullback. Now, you don't think of Chilwell as so like a super defensive fullback like perhaps Azpilicueta. So that's good already. But he's just better at defending than Reguilon. Chelsea's problems down that left-hand flank is defending. Who's better at defending in both boxes? Ben Chilwell. Who's taller? Ben Chilwell. What's happened is they've assessed the weaknesses in this particular Chelsea side and be like, what fixes what we need? Ben Chilwell fixes what we need. But the kids, like I don't say kids, that's really derogatory. The fans on Twitter, they look at Reguilon and go, "This is an excellent, exciting attacking player. He's who I'd put into perhaps my FIFA team because he's got all these high stats and he can score goals and he looks great and it's an exotic, sexy signing." But the pragmatists will be like, "Well, we're weak and vulnerable here. Ben Chilwell solves that problem, and people kind of need to be a little bit more, I think, objective in evaluating the transfer. I think."
Yeah, I definitely agree with you about sort of the negativity over Chilwell in the sense that you have to look at it, I think, also from the Premier League experience type way for me, I think, with Chilwell, because
Mhm.
having a player that's used to playing in the Premier League for me is, I think, of big benefit. And I think that's something that's probably underrated by some people without, bringing in a player for me in a massively important position for Chelsea that's needed improving for a number of years. To have someone that isn't going to, that fear of sort of him having to adapt to a new sort of pace, a new sort of style to the league, I think is something that I think is good for Ben Chilwell. I think it's just that price for me. And do you think, because I see it generally whenever Chelsea are linked with an English player, do you think there's a bias sort of against English players in that sense, usually because of the price?
Yes, I mean to pick up on something you said before I answered that. Absolutely, with the EPL experience, something that I've been saying recently is you can take a risk further up the pitch with foreign players in terms of attacking expression, perhaps inability to communicate with teammates around them, more instinctive in terms of passing and combining and finishing. But at the back, you need to be 100% communicative. You need to be able to speak English essentially fluently, comfortably to command people. Like you can't take risks at the back. You need to have experience and communication. An English Premier League player is going to bring that top player. So that's people can't escape or avoid that factor. It's just so important. You build from the back. Everyone needs to be the further up the pitch you get, the less you talk. So it's just so important, to move on to your next question on the next point. Yes, there is like a peculiar resentment around it, but English players as products, or whatever, they cost more money, rightly or wrongly. They cost more money. There's probably a multitude of economical reasons for that, but that's the case, and that's the case for people who like the idea of bringing in English players and the people who are opposed to it. Everyone can agree on they're overpriced, so that's like an unavoidable factor. Harry Maguire for 85 million personifies that whole notion. That is incredible, like insane. That's just mental, basically. So yeah, there is it's not like that's not a bias, that's just the market, how the market is. There's a premium on that. I think everyone reacts negatively, people who want English players, because it's not like a xenophobic Brexit thing to support Chelsea as an English person and like the idea of having English players. You'll get crucified by certain people on Twitter for thinking that, but Chelsea are a proud multicultural club. Certainly the last like 2 decades, loads of we nicknamed Chelsea, from the rival fans and all this. Give me a break. Chelsea are not this like Brexit FC. Frank Lampard, the greatest players around him in his playing days were like European, like sort of international superstars that he loved playing with, So I'm not having this peculiar Brexit FC perspective of Frank Lampard and his English bias. No, he wants Chelsea to win, and he won surrounded by European greats. So that needs to be sort of waved away. But I'm half French. I love the fact how there's a couple of French players in there. I love the fact how we can bring in like superstar German players. It's excellent. That makes us better. That's international, multicultural, like I said. But I love the fact how we can have a few English players in there, because that's rare. It's been rare for us, so you should not be made to feel bad for being excited, for being an English guy who supports an English club in an English league, finally having a few English players in. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's just, I think it's perhaps international fans that rightly see Chelsea as an international product club now, because it is. But they shouldn't think negatively to this perspective. I don't want Chelsea to be a team of Englishmen. It'd be boring. It would be you want a bit of like to use the term again, multicultural, a bit of exoticism or whatever. That's exciting. That's what makes the Premier League great. But it'd be boring if we were 11 English people. But I'm rambling here, Dan. Basically, there is a bit of controversy about it. It's unnecessary. It's to do, like I said, if Ben Chilwell was tearing up, if Ben Chilwell was Jadon Sancho as an Englishman, there'd be no problem with there. Look at it that way. That's probably how I should have started and ended my point.
No, I think I agree with you. I think if Ben Chilwell, I tweeted this, I think on Saturday, I was like, if his name was Ben Chilwellion and he played for Getafe and people didn't watch him week in, week out in the Premier League and weren't very used to him, and he didn't have a 50 million price tag on him, I think there would, because I'm sure like you, I've studied these numbers. I've looked at comparisons between Tagliafico and it's always been Chilwell. Who when you get a new left back target for Chelsea, it's always benchmarked against Chilwell. The numbers aren't that different, to be honest. They aren't for me. They aren't drastically where I'm like, if you get Ben Chilwell, it's a massive downgrade. I think I agree with you. I think maybe there's a sense that some people watch. I didn't even know who Sergio Reguilon was a week before we were linked to him. I can't say that I knew who he was. And then you study about these players, but I want to ask you about fullback play. How big of a role do you think fullback play is instrumental to Frank Lampard's sort of system next season?
Well, I think great question. I think he wants it to be massive, and something that I keep Frank Lampard. I've heard this on the Straight Out of Cobham podcast. Liam Twomey, Simon Johnson, Dominic Fifield, they all talk about it. For his touchline antics with Jurgen Klopp, he's actually, in that little argument or whatever, he actually looks at Klopp with great admiration because of how similar his Liverpool team and his Chelsea team are now, and also how Klopp plays football. And he looks at him as the benchmark, right? and Liverpool play football successfully. They've dismantled the Premier League this campaign by using the flanks, not in like a really wide wing back way, but they have a really functional midfield. Now, I don't think Frank Lampard wants that. I don't think he wants. I think he wants offensive ability a bit more over the functionality of, say, the Liverpool midfield. But the way Liverpool use their wingers, the way they, again, I don't think Frank Lampard will want necessarily so much a Firmino type centre forward, but he wants perhaps the functionality. He wants a little bit more functionality sometimes out of Tammy. But he looks at how the wide channels of that Liverpool team, that's how they completed the Premier League. And it was so integral from their fullbacks. And, you speak to like journalists, football writers of the modern age, they'll tell you about the evolution of the fullback in today's game, how huge it is. I mean, look at Trent Alexander-Arnold and Alphonso Davies for different reasons, how influential they are on their teams. Alexander-Arnold is Klopp's almost developed a new role for him, which is like the playmaking fullback, which is just mental. He can run a game from right back. I'm not saying he wants that out of Reece James, but he wants a lot out of Reece James in terms of how they play. And at the moment, he hasn't got anything for a left back from what he wants. Now, I'm not saying Ben Chilwell is going to be the equivalent of that either. I'm saying he's a player that plugs issues, but he wants an engine on him. Ben Chilwell's very much got an engine, and he looks at like Emerson, and he's like, "You're absolutely nothing what I need." And to go back on what we just said a minute ago with like Sergio Reguilon, Emerson was like this sexy fullback signing who had a really good stint at Roma before he had an injury and probably posting similar numbers. The way he dribbled and went forwards, he was this affordable European option that we're going, oh, look at Sergio Reguilon. I love the player Reguilon, I'm not against him. Or Tagliafico, for example, posting these relatively good European numbers. And Tagliafico is playing in the Eredivisie, not like a top 5 league, let's remember as well. These people that keep throwing out these players, this was like Emerson Palmieri. Do you know what I mean? This is the similar price, similar level of profile, exciting when he was in a bit of form, and then it comes to the Premier League and it hasn't worked out. This is why the Premier League experience is really, really important, There's people need to remember that. Now, I tweeted out about Tagliafico, Reguilon, Emerson and Zappacosta, not necessarily comparing the players directly, but these European options, alternatives that come with risk. So there's that. But yeah, sorry, just to answer your question fully, yes, massive the functionality of the fullback. Frank Lampard said it throughout the season in interviews with Jason Cundy after on Chelsea TV or whatever, or in press conferences. He's reiterated several times the importance of the fullback, which is absolutely true in the modern game.
Do you think, just one last thing on the fullback play, do you think a bit like how Pep Guardiola uses his fullbacks to sort of help shield defensively and sort of cutting inside to midfield? I see Reece James do this a lot because I think it very much, not only from probably his instructions by Frank Lampard, but also just naturally because he's played in central midfield in his career. Could you see that becoming a big thing to help us counteract against transitions next season?
Yes, absolutely. Good point. Weird with Guardiola because he inverted his fullbacks as soon as he got to City, then didn't do it, and then they've, apart from Walker, you think he's had big troubles at fullback. But that's me digressing. Excuse me. So with James on that inside channel movement, I think he should have been doing that a lot earlier because we've seen him get an eye for goal and he can whip a shot. And if not, maybe you could play a through ball and stuff. And that looks like the way he started dovetailing with Willian, going in and out and swapping positions towards the latter stages of the campaign. Something we probably could have benefited from a little bit earlier. But, teething season, isn't it? Teething problems in the season. Yeah, I think he will come inside more. We know he can play to the byline and put a cross in. He's got or even just play 2/3 up the pitch and put a diagonal in. He's got that in his locker. That's great. He needs to work on his defence, but he does need to do those infield runs, like you say, more. Perhaps that is a new instruction from Lampard, but there's a lot to come from Reece James, and we know he can comfortably occupy the middle section of the pitch from his time at Wigan and just watching him play generally before the season. So yeah, it's going to be massive.
I think it's going to be exciting seeing Ziyech as well on that right hand side and seeing some clip. I don't know if you saw the same clip I did from training where Ziyech it was a left-footed cross into the box and both Giroud and Werner were making runs to head it.
Nice.
And I think that potentially could be something we see more often next season. Lastly, before we finish the conversation, I just want to ask you a little bit about next season. Sort of your hopes for next season. I think it's varying when I talk to people. Some people hope that there may be a title challenge on the horizon. Other people say, you know, third place is good, or, you know, they're a little bit more concerned about next season. Where do you rate our chances in the Premier League next year?
What would I like, or what would I rate?
You rate or like? You know, I think it's the same thing.
Well, it's Chelsea, innit? So you don't know what the hell's going to go on. I had a conversation about this earlier about my friend says, what would be a success for Lampard next season? This is the same friend who's a United fan I told you about earlier. And I said, look, firstly, we have to get top 4. If we finished 5th, I'm not saying Lampard would get sacked, but the questions would come up after the signing. So to qualify for the Champions League, again, that will be the target, and obviously to close the gap. That's the recurring narrative, closing the gap. But without closing the gap for the moment, because that's, you know, we don't know the points finished. Let's just say we qualify for the Champions League. For me, the main thing on top of that isn't necessarily winning a trophy, isn't even going perhaps a round further in the Champions League. I used this example and I think it was quite helpful. Look at Wolves, right? Wolverhampton. We finished like comfortably above them in the Premier League. No one criticises Wolves, do they? They just don't. They're a very functional team. They've got good players. They're not a bunch of like dogged Championship players like Sheffield. Wolves have got very good players, and they play like a successful, functional team. No one ever criticises Nuno because they're accomplished. They know what they're doing. That's the opposite of Chelsea. Chelsea finished comfortably above them, but with loads of criticism, rightly, for naivety and perhaps lack of chemistry and dysfunction. For me, getting rid of that's the next step. Obviously, nearly imperative is finishing in the Champions League spot, nearly mandatory for me. But more important is to get this perception of Chelsea as a team. And I think it's really important to use the likes of someone like Wolves as an example, because we have finished better than them, but it's our perceptions of the team. That's what will show growth. And that's the next step for me. And then perhaps closing the gap. You're allowed like a couple of years these days. And for me, that's paramount. It's getting this perception and idea of comfort, of functionality that comes next. But top 4 with that would be ideal.
I agree with you. I think third for me, I'd love to see. I just don't want to get into the final 10 games of the season again and be worrying about us not getting Champions League football, because it's been a slog we've been in for 3 years. And I think moving on from that, I'm not so optimistic about a title challenge, just simply because of how good Man City and Liverpool are, and also how, you know, not only do we need to get the right signings in, they all need to gel. And it's like, look at Liverpool, I think is a great sort of plan or a template you could look at, in a sense that, you know, they got some of those signings in, Van Dijk, Mane, Salah, but it took them a little bit to finally get ready to go in for a title challenge. So it could be similar. Even if we get the big signings in, it's a lot has to happen. I don't know if you agree, I personally think that attacking wise, I want to see like the best attacking I've seen at Chelsea maybe since like Ancelotti next season.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see.
And why not? We've got the players. And there is one thing, though, that we need to think about. That I literally, as you were speaking, just thought of there. You talked about Ziyech and Reece James on that right-hand side. Is that going to be a vulnerability for Chelsea defensively? You know, is Ziyech going to track back and do all the physical defending in the Premier League? Is he going to be anywhere near as an effective defensive winger as Willian, with, you know, how God knows how many years experience? Are people going to look at that flank? And is Frank Lampard going to have to put Azpilicueta back in at right back? You know, he's like, look, okay, so Ziyech is creating 3.5 big chances per game or something ridiculous. I can't get rid of that, but we're getting murdered down that side because James is cutting in, or James is still learning defensively. I need to put Azpilicueta in. There could be all these like mini journeys along the way. But yeah, if we get those players, if we get Havertz, if we, you know, all these players, you know, Mason Mount ups his game, this, that, and the other. There's no reason to suggest that Chelsea just can't be ruthless and score like, I don't know, 80 goals or whatever, and more north of 80 goals. And what does Ancelotti's 100 Premier League goals or something?
I think, yeah, definitely. I mean, only just got beaten recently by City, didn't it? By about
City,
a goal or two. So
north of 80, 85 goals would be an exciting, excellent attacking team. And, you know, conceding less than
100
40.
goals would be good.
Maybe less than 40. You know, like how many goals do we concede? 50? I don't know. I can't remember exactly.
I think it's 54. I was reading about that. Yeah.
All right. If we score more goals and shave 14 conceded off or something like that, I'll take it. But yeah, it's going to be mad, man. Who can predict a Chelsea season? Do you know what I mean? You'd be madman to try, but that's what we do, right? So
we are the most predictably unpredictable team in world football. I mean, we really are. It's one of those mad things. You could see us losing games we're not supposed to lose, and then the next week going and beating a team like Liverpool or Man City. You just never know. I just hope it'll be less of an emotional roller coaster. But knowing Chelsea, that's asking for too much. You know,
I'd have full head of hair before the season, mate.
Oh, definitely. that into the season, man. What I think as well, watching the games and not being at the games, I find I can deal with being at a game even if we lose. Sitting at home and watching games is just
you just feel so
really
powerless, don't you?
Definitely. That Wolves game, the build up to that Wolves game was horrible. But thank you so much, Anne, for coming on the channel and having a discussion today. Yeah. As I do with all my guests, give you a chance to shout out where people can find you. I'm sure pretty much everyone watching this knows your channel, but just to give you a chance, where can people find your work online?
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. YouTube, Football Therapy, and Twitter at Football Yannick or at Chelsea Yannick.
All good. Links for that will be in the description box below. But thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter at Son of Chelsea. Have a great day, and I'll see you again.